Okay, so I wanted to just kick off with just a little bit of background. So the David Attenborough documentary that we're talking about, A Life on Our Planet, is live on Netflix already. It would be really interesting to know on the chat if you've watched it yourself, or even if you've already introduced it to your class at all in lessons. But it's available to stream. It's about an hour and a half, and it's been created through a collaboration between WWF, obviously Sir David Attenborough himself, and Silverback Films to be broadcast on Netflix. And how it came about originally because WWF were already working with Silverback Films on the Our Planet series, which was also launched on Netflix back in 2019. And during the filming of that series, which David voiced, there were lots of opportunities for the filmmakers to sit down with David, and between takes, they'd be talking about David's incredible experiences throughout his career. And then as Our Planet was released, there were opportunities for David to go and present the content of the series, but also to talk about the issues at really high level international summits and political events, the COP24, the Conference of Parties, and Davos, the World Economic Forum event. And so he was kind of doing the rounds and talking a lot about these issues that are very, close to his heart. And in the downtime, again, he'd be talking to filmmakers and to WWF's project manager about these incredible experiences that have moved him to take this step away from just being a broadcaster, away from just presenting the wonders of the natural world, and into this kind of campaigner role. And it became really clear his experience of the natural world over the last 60 years plus is absolutely unparalleled. He's thought to be the most traveled human being alive at the moment. And in that time, he has seen what no one else has been able to see. He's seen the natural world, which has been what he's been traveling around the world to experience and to present. He's seen that changing in real time within his own lifetime. So initially, there were 3 days arranged of solid 2-camera interviews with Sir David, where he basically just spoke about all of his experiences, his anecdotes, and the things that he feels passionate about, and also about his vision for the future. And that's the basis for the film, A Life on Our Planet. So it's really come just from what David wants to say and what he wants to share with the world from his unique position as this incredible explorer of the natural world. And as those of you who've seen the film will know, so David never wanted to be a campaigner. He wanted to be a naturalist and a broadcaster. He loves nature and he loves communicating it. And it's just that at this point, because of where we are with the environmental crisis and the climate crisis, he feels he can no longer stand back. If he loves the natural world, he must stand up for it. So that's kind of where the idea for the documentary came from. And then it was turned around incredibly quickly, really, from the end of the filming of Our Planet to its launch in 2020. And why is it really important that we hear Sir David's vision of the future and his witness statement for nature in this year, 2021? Well, it is a very important year. It's a very special year. Towards the end of this year, in November, the UK is hosting an international event, the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, Conference of Parties, you may hear it referred to. And it's one of a series of very important high-level political events that are happening this year and which will shape the future for the next decade and beyond. So at COP itself, at the UN Climate Change Conference in November, which will take place in Glasgow, world leaders will be coming together to make some really big decisions about how much they are prepared to do, how much their countries will do to contribute to stopping climate change, and how quickly they're going to do it. And so this year, we could really take some huge steps towards achieving some of the changes that David explains are needed in his film. And his film can provide a really powerful context for your students and yourselves as to why COP and other international summits are important and relevant to them. And of course, that context to the crisis that we find ourselves in now. But as you'll hear when I talk a little bit more about the content of the film, it doesn't just lay out the problem. It talks very much about how there is a path to solutions. So I just thought it would be useful before I talk about how you can take the documentary and use it in your lessons and in your schools. I thought I'd start just by making sure that everyone's clear on what the film covers and the kind of tone and what age it's appropriate for and so on. So I'm going to present it in the form of 4 acts, if you like it. There are different sections to the film, and it does lend itself to being shown in sections. If there's a section that you find particularly useful to fuel student debate, or it ties in with a project that you're currently working on, or a subject that you're currently exploring, then you can very much take it in these different sections. But also, I think it's a really important arc that the film takes you on, and it's really useful to kind of know what those stages are. So Act 1, if you like, is David's life story. So that's about the first 15 minutes, 17 minutes. And so that's kind of really setting out, where David's coming from, the fact that he's done all this travel right from an early age, that he's been in this very privileged position to have these incredible experiences in his role as a BBC broadcaster. Then Act 2 starts to look at what he's witnessed over that time. So, it starts off incredibly exciting for Sir David. He's going around the world. He's seeing things that very few humans have seen. He's having the opportunity to infuse and share his passion for the natural world. But over time, of course, he's starting to go back to some of those same places. And he's seeing unsustainable practices having had a real impact on places that he saw maybe a decade, maybe 2 decades earlier. And he's seen how that has had an impact on wildlife and wild places. And so in this section, Sir David talks about a few different landscapes he's visited time and time again, and about the impact that he's seen there. So he covers rainforests, oceans, grasslands, he talks about the Masai Mara, and he talks more generally about the impact of climate change and those kinds of evidence for climate change that he's seen through this stage. And it's worth saying at this stage, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but at this point in the film, towards the end of this section, it does get fairly bleak. It's very different from the kind of tone that you might be used to from David Attenborough documentaries, those that he presents, those that he voices. And what that means for the way that you might use this in the classroom is going to sort of come in a little bit later in the webinar. But I thought just to kind of illustrate that, it would be worth just showing a very short snippet. I'm aware that quite a few educators on the call will have watched the documentary already, but just to give a sense of what I mean by that very different tone that this film brings in.
Since I started filming in the 1950s, on average, wild animal populations have more than halved. I look at these images now and I realize that although as a young man I felt I was out there in the wild, experiencing the untouched natural world, it was an illusion. Those forests and plains and seas were already emptying. So the world is not as wild as it was. Well, we destroyed it, not just ruined it. I mean, we have completely destroyed that world. That non-human world has gone. The human beings have overrun the world.
So as I said, it does get quite bleak, quite sad. It's a sad story in a sense, looking back at the natural world that he loves and seeing the damage that has been caused So this is a very different picture of Sir David Attenborough than your students might be used to seeing if they're fans of his documentaries and Planet Earth and Blue Planet, where on the whole it's wonder in the complexities of nature that he's sharing. It's also something to be aware of, and as I said, I'll come back to this a little bit later in the presentation. But the impact of some of what he says on your students who are obviously looking ahead to the rest of their lives and are being told by someone that has witnessed so much that things are at this crisis point, that they have already missed out on experiencing a lot of the wild places that he shows off and enthuses about in his documentaries. However, things do pick up. But first of all, before they do that, they get even darker. So Act 3 is about the crisis point, really, that we find ourselves in at this stage. And it talks about the danger of inaction, the danger of not doing anything, really. So he looks ahead to where we might end up if we don't act promptly. So he talks in very stark terms about what milestones somebody who's born today will see in their own lifetime. So of course, for a young person to hear that, it can be quite worrying, quite anxiety inducing. So for example, the disappearance of all life on coral reefs, the complete disappearance of the Amazon rainforest, not because it's all been cut down, but because a tipping point has been reached that means that it can no longer sustain itself, and various others. So it's quite harrowing, but of course these things have not yet happened. He's talking about what will happen if we don't act, and then the last section is after bringing us up to date with where we are now, it's about what the future could be like. So he starts talking about the ways that we can solve this problem. So that first sort of 56 minutes, that first hour really of the film is really the context to where we are now. And it puts everything all in one place. It explains the connections between some of those issues, but it does set out in very stark terms the urgency of our current situation and the ways and the dangers of not addressing the problems, which are mainly biodiversity loss in all these different wild areas of the world and climate change. But however, Act 4, as I've put it here, is the solutions, and that is all about how we can fix the problem. So the tone kind of changes here, and he starts showing that actually we don't have to sit and take this, and actually that the future is not yet written. So I'll set out the key solutions that he presents, and if there's any questions about them, I can answer them at the end, because I won't have time to spend much time on each one of them. So the first one he talks about the fact that the human population has boomed and is continuing to grow. However, there is a way that we can fairly and safely curb the growth of human population so that we can stop becoming an unsustainable drain on the planet. And that is by tackling poverty. It's by addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So many of you might already bring the Sustainable Development Goals into your work, and you'll know that it brings together the key objectives to achieve a sustainable and fair future. And they include addressing the damage to the planet, the life on land, life in the water, climate change, fresh water, and so on, and also things like education and poverty and famine, addressing all of those so that we have fair opportunities for all to enjoy a happy life. And what Sir David sets out here is that if we continue to work on that, if we continue to ensure that everyone is raised up and poverty does not affect a proportion of the human race, then population will level off naturally. It's something which is just an outcome of higher quality lives for everyone. So that's something which obviously speaks to that idea of social justice being connected to climate change, which some of your students might have come across as well. And then perhaps the more familiar practical solutions come next. So first of all, switching to clean energy, tackling the main cause of climate change, which is fossil fuels. Protecting the ocean. He talks about the ocean's key role in absorbing carbon and heat, as well as being extremely important to us and for our future as a food source, and as you know, an incredibly important part of the ecosystem of our planet. So having in the first half of the film set out really the real dangers, the real threats to the ocean as one of the key affected biomes of our planet. He's then explaining that we can protect the ocean, we can manage it so that life is sustained, and we don't have those issues explained in the Seaspiracy documentary, for those that have seen it. He talks about transforming food and farming. That's something which is easy to connect to everyone's lives, and again, one of the areas where there are huge opportunities, some real stories of solutions already in action that we can see rolling out over the next few years. And he talks about the importance of protecting and restoring forests. So not only the importance of forests for stabilizing the climate and for biodiversity, but also that need to stop deforestation, which releases carbon itself, and restore what has been lost to just improve our future prospects. And then towards the end of this section, having laid out this 5-point plan for really how we can turn things around, he starts looking to what that future could look like if we really do address these issues. And this is where the film really becomes a lot more positive in its tone. And I think it's really important that we include this part of the story, part of his vision, when we're addressing these issues and using the film with students. So he talks about how we can imagine a new world, one where we move from being apart from nature to being a part of nature, which I think is a lovely way of thinking about it. He talks about how we can live in balance with nature, we can live sustainably, and this is the aspect of the film that really brings in hope, and hope is an incredibly important part of dealing with the environmental crisis and climate change in schools. So how is this relevant to your students? How is this content going to be useful for you? Well, first of all, there are lots of links to curriculum. So the film covers climate change, the environment, there's links with PSHCE, but also I think as educators, if you've joined this call, the chances are that you see the value of bringing these stories and these topics to your students because they're important for them to understand. And as educators, you know, one of our key roles, in fact, our key role is to equip our students for the future. And that's for their benefit, and it's for the benefit of society, for the benefit of our future. So in very short terms, we want them to be able to drive a sustainable future and to thrive in that future as it is reshaped. And that means preparing them for the world as it will be. It means making sure they do understand the reality of the environmental crisis, and they understand what it means for them now and in the future. And it is extremely relevant to them, not just because they are faced with you know, the future that's been that is the result of all of the mistakes we've made over the years. That's a kind of depressing way of looking at it, but it's also important because it will shape what that future is like. And if they can understand what the future will be like and what the new priorities will be, then they can equip themselves to thrive in it. So the environmental crisis, all the issues that David set out in the film, they are happening around them, and education needs to reflect reality. But it's extremely relevant to them because it's their future jobs that will be shaped by what those priorities are for the future, and they can play a role now in acting for change. They can put pressure on decision makers to do what needs to be done, and they can also start to look at practical actions they can take and that they can encourage others to take. So I mentioned the curriculum links, and they're available through our live lessons page, but also some of the resources that are developed around the Our Planet series. So if you are looking to kind of embed this in a particular subject area, there are sections of the film or the whole film itself that can really enforce some discussion by students around some of these quite complex issues. So I've mentioned it a few times. I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes thinking about mental health when we're talking about these quite stark messages that are in the film. It's very different from, as I said, the celebratory content of some other David Attenborough wildlife documentaries. And some of us might already be noticing that there are risks in discussing these issues with our students. So there are a few points that I just wanted to make about how you can bring these hard-hitting issues and these kind of slightly worrying threats to the future into the class in a way that avoids eco-anxiety amongst your students and avoids causing any kind of mental health issues that obviously are not what we want to create. So there is a really important part of the film, as I mentioned, towards the end, where it really starts to think about what the future could be like. And it doesn't just talk about the future either being a dystopia or us averting disaster. It talks about the future actually being, really exciting. We can create a new future that works better than now. It's not about losing stuff from what we have now because now is perfect. It's about actually shaping something better. So hope is really, really important. And I've got a very simple acronym which might prove useful in thinking about all the different elements to take into consideration when bringing these issues into the classroom. So it's the acronym is HERE, and it goes like this. The first is hope, and hope is what's far more motivating than despair, but it also ensures that all of these issues you can kind of approach them without that sort of all-consuming anxiety that would come along if it felt that there was nothing to be done. But the next is empathy. What I'd suggest is that when you start to bring these issues into the classroom, when you start to think about bringing the film to your students, just consider first of all the particular circumstances of your students. They may be prone to anxiety. They may have parents who are actually working in the fossil fuel business or the aviation business or in meat farming or one of the industries that is held up as a problem in the film, or they might be meat eaters. They probably are, and they might have their own reasons for being meat eaters that mean that veganism is not an option, and diet is one of the things that the film talks about, and how you can have a lower impact diet, because it's really important that when these issues are brought up, there is no focus on individual responsibility or blame, because the problem is the combined effect of everything, and it's the fact that at the moment, as a society, as a species, we're living unsustainably, and that's a whole system, and we're just living in that system. So we're not to blame for what we contribute as part of the system that we didn't solely create. We're just we were born and have evolved into it. So any way that you feel that students might be caused to feel guilty or ashamed for family behaviours they have no say over, or things that they have no power over, that's definitely something to try and avoid in the way things are framed. The third is action. So action is an incredibly important way to help that hope feel grounded in reality. So countering feelings of helplessness and to show that actually things can be done right now, and there's a course of action for students to consider in the future. So even if the real reason for you bringing this content into the classroom is just to increase their understanding of an issue or a subject, the importance of oceans, just bearing in mind that it is also bringing in these potentially worrying facts and these worrying statistics, means that you should also consider bringing in hope and bringing in action as ways to ensure that those things don't land in a way that's harmful. And action is something which I'd really encourage school, class, and individual discussion about after watching the film, because you do get this big picture of how everything is connected and how we all need to move together in a unified way to bring about this positive future. And schools can have a massive impact in society, and there's actually ways that you can come together as a school community, and as well as acting as individuals, to help bring that change more quickly. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But finally, the R of here is relevance. The issues can seem far off, which means it's all the more worrying if you're feeling that you're going to be affected by these issues, but they're happening all the way over in the Amazon. There's nothing you can do about them. So it's really important to think about the role that everyone can play. So with COP coming up, with the climate change conference coming up later this year, there actually is something tangible to think about getting voices of students out through the various opportunities there'll be in the lead up to COP, but also just the things that you can do in terms of, for example, diet choice, that as you learn through the film actually end up having an impact somewhere far away around the world. And of course, the big thing here is the future. And in the future, they will be part of the reshaping of the world, reshaping of society. Their future career will be in this new world and will be part of what makes it the way it is. So they can prepare now in order to have the best opportunities possible in the future, but also to play as much of a role as they want to in positively changing how society works. So how can we support you to use the film and its content in the classroom? So we've got loads of opportunities for you as educators. The first and simplest one is simply to let you know that the film, you have a free license to show the film in school, in class, or to the whole school in an assembly, or even on a call, a Zoom call like this. And all you need to be able to do is access Netflix in order to be able to show the film on a big screen, or in assembly, or on a call. I'm aware that Netflix is sometimes not accessible to a school. You can download it onto a device and then show it, project it from that device if you've got the app. But even that is sometimes problematic. So what WWF are doing this month is organising some free school screenings of the film, online screenings, and really encourage you to sign up for those if you think that would be a useful way to introduce this to your class. There are screenings that are designed for secondary schools because they show the whole film, but also you'll find that the live lessons that are online for primary schools, which my colleague Amy will mention in a moment, actually just have selected some snippets to highlight for primary schools, which might give you some pointers on how you can use the content most effectively with that age group. But if you go to attenborough.com/schools, you'll be able to download a pack that gives you some advice for running that screening and making the most of it, but also gives you a template for an action planning workshop that you can do off the back of it to kind of think about what your school and the individuals in the school community can do to take positive action. Now I'll pass over to Amy at this stage, who I think I'll need to give permission to talk, to just say a few words about some of the school focused activities, the live learning activities that we've got coming up in the next month or so.
Yeah, sure. So we have different program of things for primary and secondary. So I'll start with primary and then I'll move on to secondary. So for primary classes, we have a series of live talks running on Thursday mornings, starting on the 29th of April. So these live talks are based around a certain theme covered in the film. So we've got one on forests, one on oceans, one on food and farming, and then a sort of summary session, which will end on the 10th of June. And in the summary one, we'll have a big quiz and announce some competition winners for a competition that we're going to be asking people to get involved with after our live lessons and live talks. So in each of these live talks, we'll show sections of the David Attenborough film, roughly around 15 minutes or so for each live talk. And then we'll have a fun quiz based around the topic. And we'll have a STEM ambassador from STEM Learning coming to speak about their work in conservation, environment, or sustainability. So just as an example, our first one is on the 29th of April at 10 a.m. It's going to be focused on forests, and it will have a STEM ambassador who works as an environmental advisor for big sorts of projects, a bit like HS2 and things like that. And her job is to monitor ancient woodlands, and she sets up camera traps to monitor wildlife like badgers and things. So it should be really interesting. And if you haven't signed up for those talks yet, you can do so on our website. For our secondary offering, as Matt said before, we're going to be showing the full film to classes using Zoom. So either in full as one session, which will take about 1.5 hours, or in 2 parts of 45 minutes each. So hopefully means you can find a way to fit this into your lessons. We're offering a few different dates, and you can find those on our website as well. And as Matt said, of course, you can show the film yourself if you have Netflix. You don't have to come to the screenings, but this is just for schools that who can't get around the Netflix issue. We wanted to make sure that everyone was able to see it if they wanted to. And then as well as that, we're also offering some live lessons based around the film and based around David Attenborough's life. So the primary lesson, which I know quite a few of you on this call will have signed up to, covers a bit about David Attenborough's life, the subject of natural history, and then it dives into those 4 topic areas: climate change, oceans, forests, and then food and farming. And we discuss some of these problems and then some of the solutions to help out biodiversity. The lessons are quite interactive, so students get to take part and answer questions. They have very short, like a couple of minute-long clips from the film in there as well. And as always with the live lessons, we like to have a little fun quiz at the end. And there will be some secondary live lessons as well. I know quite a lot of teachers have registered for these already because they're almost fully booked, which is brilliant up until the summer term. But if you haven't managed to register, you can have a look and see if we've got any slots on our website. Otherwise, we're going to be making the presentations available for teachers, and we'll be recording the lessons as well. So if you don't manage to book a session with either me or Caroline, who is the secondary education officer, you'll be able to show the recorded version to your class at a time that best suits you. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Amy. So I've just put the link up as well for not just registration for that Q&A webinar, but also any live lessons that Amy's just mentioned there. And we'll also have any resources that are created for you to run that lesson yourself. Will go up on the same page. So that's your kind of your jumping off point for all of the stuff that WWF UK is creating to help with the classroom. And so I've been monitoring the chat. There was a quick question which I think I've answered around the format of the film. I'll just to make it really clear, we are sorry, but it has to remain on Netflix. It's part of the kind of the legal side of the distribution policy. So hence these live screenings that we're offering over the next few weeks. But if you can't make any of the dates for the live screenings that we're offering, and you can't do Netflix either, do get in touch with us for advice. But we can't. The film isn't available as a file or on any other platform. It has to be via Netflix. But we might be able to give you some advice on how you can overcome that. And some schools have already started to kind of take the initiative and take the film into the classroom and inspire their students. Maryport Church of England Primary School, quite close to the launch date for the film, screened the film, and then were so inspired and impassioned by what they saw that they ran a local campaign. They designed T-shirts that kind of expressed their views on why these issues were important and everyone should be talking about them, and did a little peaceful protest march around their community, which generated some local press and community interest. So it does tend to leave an impression, and as I mentioned, provided you're sort of aware of the potential for some of these messages to be quite hard-hitting, and the film itself sort of picks up that arc at the end, and you can do even more to make sure that that happens and to drive towards action. And there's huge amounts of potential. So if you do have any more questions before we end the call, do put them in the chat. I know we're at the end of the half hour, but I'm happy to stay on just to answer any questions that would be really useful for you to ask. And while we're just giving some time for people to do that, I'll just flash through a couple of things that might be useful. First of all, there's a suite of primary resources associated with David Attenborough Life on Our Planet already available on Twinkle. I can't remember if we linked to them from our website, but we can probably do that after this. But if not, if you search for David Attenborough on Twinkle, they come up very quickly, and they're in the free section. You know, you don't have to be behind the paywall on Twinkle for these, and they sort of reflect WWF's messaging and input there, so they're kind of scientifically verified, and they're really useful just for running some easy activities based around the content of the film. And as you may have seen on our website already, we're calling for students to, or young people to submit their future vision. So you hear in the film how David Attenborough feels we can, you know, shape the future in a better way and avoid the potential threats of environmental damage. But what that future actually looks like is really to be defined, and it's the future that our students can work towards. So we're asking, we've created some beautiful films that are CGI enhanced, as you can see from the image on the screen, that kind of give some ideas of what a sustainable future might look like. But what we really want is students to reflect on what they would want the future to look like, and how they would want to shape that future, and what kind of future they'd like to live in. And they can express that through using our video resources. So they can create their own soundtrack, they can create their own voiceover, their own story to go with the film, and record that over a version of the film that has no music and no voiceover. Or they can create something completely different. They can create their own video, they can create their own music track, they can create their own artwork. And at the moment we're running a small competition for artwork submissions for the Future Visions Challenge, which perhaps Amy, you could come back on and just say a few words about. If Amy's still there, or do I need to ask you to unmute? Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I was trying. Yeah, so just as an ask after, if you come to one of our live lessons, go to a screening, or you come to one of the live STEM Ambassador talks, we'd really like students to be able to draw their future vision and submit it to us for a bit of a competition. So we've got some really simple templates to download from our web page for students to draw these visions. So we've got they're based around the three themes of those live talks we're going to be doing. So there's one based on our future visions of our forests, one on oceans, and one on food and farming. And then we have a more general template as well. So if teachers send in these drawings to us, to our email address, which is education@wwf.org.uk, we'll be putting some of our favourites on our website, sharing them on our teacher Facebook group, and we might be able to also showcase some of them later on in the year at COP26. So if you do want to use this resource, please do make sure you send them through to us.
Thanks, Amy. And to state the obvious, this Future Visions Challenge is very much focused on bringing that element of hope and that action-orientated view of finding solutions and shaping a positive future. So it's a great thing to do with your students off the back of exploring you know, the harder hitting aspects of the film, the resources, looking at the issues. Great. Okay, well, thanks for all of you who've stayed on for an extra 10 minutes. There's just a quick plug, really. There's another of these webinars to come up in May, 26th of May, which looked at what you can do after watching this film. When you've kind of shown the film, you've discussed the issues, you've brought them into curriculum teaching, what can you do as a school to actually take action? So if you haven't already, you can sign up for that on the same link as you signed up for this webinar. And that will be about how you can run an school action planning workshop in your school, and then how you can embed sustainability and actually start acting for positive change. And there's one step that you can take even today, or certainly when you've consulted with others in the school, which is to sign up for the Let's Go Zero campaign, which I'll talk more about at that webinar. But it's something for any school in the UK to sign up to say that actually you are committed to doing as much as possible to achieve net zero. So as a school, and by doing it as a school, to help you know, drive and inspire society as a whole. So yeah, well, thanks very much. since I haven't had any questions, I'm just plugging everything. So I'm going to plug one more thing, which is if you think this content's useful, and if you're kind of really passionate about looking for ways to act for the planet as an educator, we really recommend our free Teacher CPD course, which is at that bit.ly link that's now on screen. Is it not there? It should be in the black bar on your screen. But I can, yeah, I think we're going to circulate some notes after this to everyone that's joined the call and registered. So we'll make sure all the links are in there. But it's there's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/WWF ESD course. And it's Education for a Sustainable Planet. It's 5 bite-sized courses. So you do each of those little modules in under an hour, depending on how much thought you want to put in around your answers. You fill in a reflective journal, and then if you submit the journal to us at the end, you'll get a certificate for course completion from WWF. But whether you do that or not, you get a Microsoft Teacher CPD badge for each of the modules and one for completing the whole course, which is called a learning pathway. Yeah, that's thoroughly recommended. It gives you the basics in a whole school approach to sustainability, gives you hopefully some inspiring case studies of things that you could do in schools. And it's just maybe something you can do over a few evenings to really give yourself some direction in what you might do next. And that's a bit of a summary slide. It's got the link for the David Attenborough Life on Our Planet microsite, which has that screening pack that I mentioned. It's got the link to Let's Go Zero if you feel that that's something your school can sign up to straight away. The link for our resources where you can sign up for our live lessons and the webinar, our Education for a Sustainable Planet free course, and then finally that Future Visions Challenge, which is a really great thing to do off the back of the film. So we'll leave it there. And if you do suddenly kick yourself at the end when you've come off the line that you didn't ask a question and you really want to know the answer, do just drop us an email to education@wwf.org.uk. We really hope to see you at the next webinar or any future webinars that we put on for teachers, and hope that you can sign up to some of these programs and live lessons that we've introduced you to today. And in the meantime, if you haven't already watched the film, that's your evening sorted. So I hope you enjoy it and find it well thought-provoking, also ultimately uplifting and optimistic. So thanks again, and goodbye.